This is a relay project.
The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. This week, a new poll shows that Premier Smith is continuing to hold her election support. So we'll dive into those numbers and what they mean for the party and the opposition.
Plus, a collection of 14 Pride organizations have banned the UCP from participating in their celebrations this summer after the governing party brought in policies that would restrict medical treatment for transgender youth. We'll talk about that and the implications, and the NDP has released its membership numbers. We'll talk about how they compare to the UCPs and how the base of support appears to have shifted from Edmonton to Calgary. But before we get to any of that, a couple of important announcements. The first announcement is that The Discourse is going to be signing off for the summer. Next week will be our last show of the season, but we will be back in the fall and we'll be doing a couple of bonus episodes between now and then, but our regular Thursday episodes won't be back until September. That being said, the second announcement we have to make today is far more exciting.
Yes, we're going out with a bang this season by having Premier Danielle Smith join us next week. We'll be asking her what she's experienced since last year when we were in election mode, and what she's proud of and thinks there's improvements on what her government could be doing. We'll bring that to you next week.
That episode will actually fall almost a year to the day since the last election. So it'll be an interesting experience for Erika and I to reflect on what happened a year ago. And also, I have been saving up some questions for Premier Smith.
But none of this would be possible without our sponsors. And I don't know about you, but this entire part of the year is about like swapping out your winter jackets and your mitts and finally bringing out, after, a little bit of interesting spring, our summer gear. And the one thing I've realized is how much I wish that I had mindful storage that works for me, so that it is a one day, not an entire weekend project, to switch out my winter or seasonal gear. Our friends over at California Closets make the most of this space with their custom organizational systems. This means you can have space for all the seasons and can design it for your family needs. Call today for your free consultation or head over to californiaclosets.ca to learn more.
Okay, the numbers, the latest numbers. CBC has released a poll done by Janet Brown Opinion Research looking at what has changed since the election a year ago. Now, given at the moment the NDP do not know who the next leader of the party will be, this poll is a little bit wonky because usually it's like, do you support the UCP led by Danielle Smith or do you support the NDP led by X? So without knowing who will be in that position in 2027, the poll is it's kind of a bit different. But taking that into consideration, Janet Brown has asked, in 2027, who are you most likely to support and how likely are you to support? And these are the numbers. So as it breaks down, 48% of people are considering the UCP and 45% the NDP. And if we look back at the election result, I think the UCP support was about 52. So, looking at the margin of error, that is pretty close to the support that they had a year ago when they won their latest mandate.
All right. So, yeah, I think there was some really interesting takeaways I had by looking at this poll. First off, I think even if we're talking about the removal of a leader, when we look at Danielle Smith's, success rate or likability, there's a decent group that loves her and a decent group that hates her. And I think we're kind of seeing that reflected in the UCP. You're seeing about 1/3 really strongly supporting the UCP and about 1/3 not. And so I think a lot of that gray area is where they're going to play. Different is on the NDP, where there's actually, and I was actually surprised by this, Cheryl, that 37% are, not at all likely. And I would think that actually in a leadership race where you don't know who the leader would be, that you'd actually have far more somewhat likely or not very likely. So I was actually surprised by some of the what the numbers were saying. But you're right. I mean, after a year, pretty tough legislative sessions of some pretty contentious bills coming forward. And what it's telling me is, they're tough decisions, but apparently the public likes them.
Well, I mean, on the surface, you could totally say that. I mean, I think it's really easy to look at this poll and say, the NDP has held on to its power. The UCP has held on to its support since the last election, and they don't have anything to worry about. None of their decisions have hurt them so far. I think if you look deeper into this poll, some cracks are starting to show. And if I was running strategy for the UCP, I would be worried about these little cracks at the moment. One is that, if you look at the regional breakdown, yes, the UCP leads 49-45. This is taking out those undecided people who haven't decided who they're going to vote for in 2027. That's fair.
Which is about
Edmonton,
6-7% is what we saw.
Yeah.
In the poll.
So that's why these numbers look a bit different. But 54% for the NDP in Edmonton versus 40% for the UCP. So, we are tied, 46,
really
46
close.
in Calgary. And then, of course, as history has shown, the UCP is way ahead in anything outside of those cities. So that's called other in this poll, 34 for the NDP, 62 for the UCP. I would be worried about Calgary in that poll if I was the UCP. And not surprisingly, the UCP could make up some ground in Edmonton as well, but I'm sure that's not the focus since they've got such a lead in the rural polls. But the other thing I would be worried about is the disapprove numbers for the premier. There are more Albertans who disapprove of Premier Danielle Smith than those who approve of them. And although she enjoys, close to 50% support, being that divisive gives not only your opposition ammunition to use against you in the lead up to the campaign, but also means that that means you have to keep every single one of your supporters for the next 3 years. And I think you start to see some of that support peel away as some of those more controversial policies have been introduced.
Yeah, I can't disagree with, like we said, the discontent or the dislike section. But I also think that that's going to be a huge thing for whomever assumes at the end of June the role as the official leader of the opposition and the leader of the NDP, because they're even at a higher, position where people aren't likely to support them. So, I think that what we'll see, and I know we've talked about this, is some of those big policies that Premier Smith and the UCP have brought in, I think it will start to go one way or the other. And those middle spots are for sure where we're going to see some shift of the people deciding that they're not likely or more likely or somewhat likely kind of start to split as we get closer to 2027. Now, it's a long time out. And I wouldn't say either party is probably super concerned or going to be staying up at night based on these numbers. But I do think you raise a good point on Calgary, which I think we've talked about the last elections. It was the battleground. When we get into the NDP membership, I know we'll talk about Calgary. So I think there's some work to be done there. Definitely. And I think that will be the strategy of the UCP, is how to talk to that Calgary base, and especially considering, if Kathleen Ganley or Naheed Nenshi are the leaders, they're based there. And Rachel Notley spent a lot of time there last year. So that would be the most concerning. No surprise on the rural, but it's actually quite significant that it could help them pull it off should this be 2027.
But we have to remember what other actually means. This is like everything grouped into one. So that means, the NDP could pick up, say, for example, both seats in Lethbridge and still pull way behind in the other category, because this is every northern seat. This is all the rural seats plus those smaller centers like Red Deer, Medicine Hat, Lethbridge. So even if a party is ahead in those smaller centers, which each could give the NDP, for example, 2 seats, the party will still it'll still lag in terms of the polling in rural Alberta. And those are the seats. Both parties went for those seats in the last 2 elections, the last 3 elections. And I imagine 2027, they will be at least Lethbridge will be competitive seats again, and hopefully Red Deer, Medicine Hat as well.
Yeah, I think, and that's the unfortunate thing about, this other is it's the rurbans, if you will, like those smaller municipalities that get lumped into rural that traditionally, Lethbridge is a prime example of being, a little bit more left leaning than perhaps, a Fort McMurray or even a Spruce Grove, Sherwood Park kind of municipality. Yeah. So or Red Deer, I guess too. But I think that'll be very interesting how they'll strategize this. But the other point is what do you think the NDP are going to do with these numbers? Their firm support is significantly lower than the UCP, and their discontent. So how do you think that they're going to actually, regardless of new leader or what Rachel's going to focus on in her last month, try and get some of those votes? Because like we said, there's swing voters, but they're not necessarily deciding in 2024 what they're going to do in 27.
Honestly, like, I don't know what those who are guiding the work of the opposition think of this poll, but if I was there, I would be really happy with this. The NDP has sort of gone much quieter than it would normally be at this time of the year throughout session. As as a leadership going on, it sucks up most of the oxygen in terms of media that the party can create. We don't know who the next leader will be. People are not necessarily imagining what the next version of the NDP looks like. So just holding that support and demonstrating that the NDP remains competitive, remains a force despite losing the last two elections, unfortunately. I think this is a show of strength for the NDP. And I think, if you look at the numbers, yes, in terms of the really solid, very likely numbers, the NDP is behind. But in overall numbers, which includes somewhat likely and very likely, we're very, very competitive. And the not at all likely numbers are also comparable, 34 to 37%, which makes sense when you look at what is like pretty close to a 50-50 split in terms of support for the parties. So if the NDP's job is to, continue to grow the party, make it through the leadership, continue to be competitive and keep volunteers engaged and keep the supporters that it currently has, and then, once there's a leader in place, really start to work to discredit the party, the UCP, and build up the new leader, I think it's in really good shape. I think this is a great place for an opposition party to be in. And honestly, I think it is the envy of opposition parties across the country.
I would say one that doesn't have a leader, it's not a bad spot. I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be upset if I was the opposition. And as much as, for our listeners that maybe don't follow polls as closely, Janet Brown and Opinion Research has been one of the most accurate in their polling in the last couple of years, especially with election results. So, I always value when Janet has polls come out. But this one, I think, again, it's not going to keep the UCP up at night. And I don't think it's a runaway. I think the most interesting thing will actually be once you guys get a new leader and how some of those, the love and hate, we'll call them, positions either go up or go down. Yeah.
And truthfully, like we always say, this is a snapshot in time.
Mm-hmm.
The only poll that matters is
May
election
2027. So when this poll was in the field, this was before the government introduced an October election. So
yeah,
or fall election.
Well, there you go. An extra few months to continue to build that support. And really, what parties are going to be looking for is those trend lines. Can the UCP hold on to what they have now through to, the next year where, hopefully CBC and Janet Brown redo this poll, and can they continue to build on it? That's what really matters. If they stay flat across 4 years, it's going to be really hard to hold on to what they have.
But I will say it's also uncommon for a premier in their first year or a party in their first year to be pretty consistent. And we have seen that across the board for the UCP. There hasn't been a huge support shift one way or the other. So I think that would be a victory from a UCP side. But again, we're a two-party system. And as we learned in the last election, it can go either way.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I would say has cost the premier some approval points is the policies that she brought in earlier this year that will be enforced through legislation on the rights of transgender youth. So just a bit of a recap. Earlier this year, the premier announced she would ban top surgeries for anyone under 18, that puberty blockers or hormone therapies would be banned for anyone under 16, even if they were courses of healthcare that the patient, their families, and their doctors recommended. And she also the premier announced that depending on a student's age, they would need permission to change their name or pronoun at school. And if you remember, back to January, this sparked a ton of public backlash from LGBTQ communities, but also the public, and from experts, including physicians. And this is all back in the spotlight again as a group of 14 Pride organizations across Alberta, including Calgary Pride, have banned not only the premier, but UCP MLAs and cabinet from participating in any of their celebrations or events this summer.
So I want to start off with, as you're looking at the statement, or if you're reading it and it's on the Instagram handle where we found it on qcu.yyc. And if I'm reading this for what it says, I read this as anyone associated with the UCP or the membership is not welcome at these events. And I quote from this: "After careful consideration and consultation with our communities, we, the undersigned organizations and associations, have taken the significant steps to not allow the participation of the United Conservative Party in our 2024 Pride celebrations."
But they have said, when they've been talking about this publicly, it's not members that they're banning, it's the premier. And then they also banned any legislators, so UCP MLAs, for not taking any action to push back against a proposed policies. So they're saying anyone who holds a seat for the UCP in the legislature who has been supportive by being silent on this policy will not be welcome.
Okay, but
they haven't said if you're a member,
if you're
you
reading
can't come.
that's chalk it up to not clear communication or trying to drive a narrative. But I think that if you're reading it for what it is, it's saying it's excluding anyone that associates with the UCP or the beliefs that they have. And that's one thing that I think is important to highlight when we're looking at this statement that they put out on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, they've said that's not the case, but sure, if you read the letter and you understand that to be party members, that would be unfair. But I think they've said pretty clearly that it's aimed at legislators who have been quiet on a topic that is aimed specifically at a group of people who have had their rights trampled on.
Yeah. So moving on from that point, I want to talk about like the politics of this, because they also say at the bottom of their statement, queer rights should not be a political decision. I'd also argue that this group isn't doing anything but political grandstanding this and making this political. I mean, they released it as a news release.
What choice do they have?
Talking to the MLAs, I know for a fact they didn't email UCP MLAs asking or telling them that they were not involved in this. They haven't asked for meetings. They didn't send this to the Premier of Alberta. So like that to me is,
Erica,
this isn't the right way to do it. This isn't the right way to do it.
No, the UCP brought in a crazy policy that takes the rights away from people who these groups represent. This happened in January. It
14 of
hasn't been walked
60-ish.
back. Yeah, but still, it's
well, where
their
are the
right.
other 45?
And I think good on them for saying we are not just a group that holds celebrations. We are not just a group that puts on parades. We are a group that advocates for the people who are part of this community. And that is exactly what they're doing. They're pushing back. They're putting this in the headlines again to say, we're going to try to affect change by putting pressure on those who have either been silent or pushed these policies through. And that is exactly what advocacy groups should do.
But if you're an advocacy group, and something that I've heard the left say a lot and be critical of this government is on consultation, conversations, discussions. And this is a group that in their release say, we invite Premier Smith to reconsider her harmful and damaging policies and engage in meaningful discussions. I'll come back, Cheryl, to the strategy of this. They did not send this to any MLAs. They did not send this to the
so
Premier.
Hypocritical.
They've only Calgary Pride has met with, I believe, Minister Furr. So like, I guess what I'm saying is like, can you actually say that putting out a press release as opposed to saying we want meaningful conversations? To me, this tactic isn't saying we want meaningful conversations. We want to be a part of those discussions.
Okay.
There hasn't been asks for that. So I
but
think
this
that
is
like
exactly what the government did when it rolled its policy out. It rolled its policy out and said, we invite discussion on it. So if you don't like act first, ask for consultation later, go back to the government, because the duty to consult with the communities most affected does not lie with the community.
So
it lies with the government.
sided with that, for the record. So are you saying two wrongs like make a right? Because I don't think that
I'm
like
saying one is a government. One is a government.
And right.
And one is an
and
advocacy
I've said
group.
that I think the government could have done this differently. So up to the government to take that initiative. They have been like, from it, what I'm saying is like, you put out this statement. I think it's exactly doing maybe the opposite of, let's just say, benefit of the doubt. They're trying to get the government to come to the table with them. This is the exact opposite strategy. You're shitting on the government. You're disinviting them. What if they said, we don't want you to wear UCP if you want to come as an individual and celebrate? Like, you're saying you can't come to the celebration. And I think it gets away from the purpose of Pride, but it also is taking them away from the perfect opportunity that, like, what if some of these MLAs wanted to vote against their party on this? And now there's not even given an opportunity to have a conversation.
Where have they been?
Not invited here. That's for sure.
They haven't been speaking up either. They've had.
But maybe they want to be educated. Maybe they're on the fence. Maybe they wanted to come to this event and learn.
Erica. 5 months, and if
so
I
did
was
these
an
groups
organization
to reach out to the government. Not one of them has asked.
It's not
or
the
had a conversation.
responsibility.
Well, if you're an advocacy group, then that damn well is your job. If you're an advocacy group, you advocate for your rights.
And that's exactly what they're doing. But
Through
if the government brings in a policy and they want to hear from people, they need to have that responsibility to do the consultation. It is not the job of the public to go seek consultation with the government.
Isn't that the whole purpose of having elected officials? You can write to them and talk to them. Like,
But there's no one saying that hasn't been done.
You can crap
I'm
on
sure
the government
received...
for how they've gone about it. Fine. I won't argue with that I think they could have done more consultation. But I also don't think that you can give a free pass to this group. And it's not even like...
I totally think you can.
It's not even 25% of their membership.
But Edmonton isn't even on behalf of their own groups.
Like, where's Edmonton? I don't even see one of the biggest groups.
It doesn't have to be all of them, though, for some of them to say, we are, like, basically they're saying, it doesn't matter. You can say you support everyone. And the government's response to this has been to say, we will continue to work towards ensuring that everyone feels valued, respected, and at home in Alberta. But if I was those groups and I was a member of those communities, I would say, you're saying one thing and you're doing another. And we're not going to stand for that. And how could we possibly invite someone to participate in pride parades when they are actively bringing in policies that take human rights away from some of the members of our communities and harm them? But like, of course they're not invited.
Okay, so you and I have both done government relations. We've coached people on advocacy. We've talked about how to get them attention of the government. This is not getting the attention of the government. This is politicizing an issue, getting into the news. If you read the comment section on a lot of the articles, there's actually so much support for what the government is doing. So I don't think it's working their best.
Thank God, public policy is not decided by comment sections.
Yeah, but it is by voters and support for policy decisions, and we still haven't seen that one.
I'm not sure it's an accurate sample of the population to look at the
I'm
comment
not saying
section.
It is. I'm saying like I think their effort, what I see this as is using the Pride Parade and the Pride celebrations to grandstand and politicize an issue, and also to take this and like, you know, it's in my mind, it's taking away from the purpose. If you don't want the UCP MLAs there, fine. Write them an email, say you're not welcome, or come without your UCP staff, whatever. Like, that's not the issue. I think the issue is that this wasn't speaking to the UCP members, and like the actual people that are going to be putting these items to a vote. Instead, it's grandstanding and politicizing something that they asked to not do in their letter, and something that Janice Irwin has done in question period. She was posting and commenting on this news release or this post. Like, you can't talk from both sides of your mouth, saying that like they're not politicizing it because they are. The NDP is politicizing it, and like
that sounds like a lot of finger pointing. But truthfully, like, the government had a massive platform. The premier rolled out a pre-produced video. If that's not politics, I don't know what is.
I didn't say it wasn't. I said that I didn't give them a gold star, but I don't think you can sit here and say these people did the right thing and approached it the right way.
I think they did. And I'll tell you why. Because they have to compete with the platform that the government has, for one. And their only purpose is to stand up for their communities. And if they individually just sign a letter and send it off to their MLA, that does not raise the collective voice that will apply the kind of pressure that would push the government to reverse course. So one-off MLA, you know, we're not inviting you to our Pride Parade. I don't think that's going to cause enough pressure. They'll just pretend they're busy that weekend. But if you put it back in the news, if you get the public talking about it again, if you get people reading articles and people talking about it on podcasts, that does raise it in the public like discourse. It does raise it as an issue that people are talking about and caring about, and it does put it back, you know, in the government's list of issues to manage. So if you want to affect change, those are necessary things to happen. And that is the job of advocacy organizations, to apply enough pressure to the government to affect change.
But I don't think this is the most constructive way to affect change. I think this is a lot of screaming and shouting and politicizing, as opposed to having that they gave out as a press release sent to media and didn't send it to any of the elected officials. So to me, you could have crossed a lot of things. I would say the strategy and the writing in it and the execution is not.
You're asking someone to give them, like, to be polite after they came out.
No, I'm asking them to do the right thing. If they want the government to do what they believe to be the right thing, then do the right thing and follow the course and ask for meetings. Like, so what, the minister and then the government ignore you? Use that and say, I've tried countless times to meet with the government and they won't. That's not happening.
Erika, they held massive protests. I'm absolutely positive they've written to the government. They've been in the media. They've probably written to their elected officials. They've probably had meetings, but the policy stands. And so eventually you have to make enough noise that the government feels pressure.
Okay, well, based on public opinion, I don't think the government feels pressure because I think there's actually a lot of silent support for this. I do think, and I'll give some free GR advice, like if you really truly want to sit down and have conversations with the government, don't do this tactic because that doesn't make any friends and it doesn't show that you're willing. This doesn't say, let's collaborate. Let's have a serious conversation. Let's talk about how serious of an issue this is to us in our community. This says, screw you. We're going to go scream and shout in the media. Like that's what I think would be the reception.
On the other side of the coin, the government could look at this and say, communities take this assault on their rights so seriously that they have not invited us to their Pride Parade. And being at the Pride Parade is really important for us as members of the community and really important for our reputation if we want people to believe that we support LGBTQ rights. They could say, we understand that you have not invited us or you've uninvited us to your celebrations. Mm-hmm. That's really an important place that we want to be. And so can we have a meeting to work out what the issues that you've described in this letter? That is the role of government. If you don't like that you weren't invited to the Pride Parade, do something about it.
And I don't know if it is about the Pride Parade or the fact that they've been banned yet another year, right? Like, I know that happened in past years when Premier Kenney was there and they asked for meetings and to join the celebration and were denied that. After a few times of asking to come to a party you're not invited to, you might stop asking.
You might get the hint that your policies are like incredibly damaging and harmful.
Or it's an opportunity to like attack the government. Either way, okay. We'll see how this plays out, right? Like, I think we're going to agree to disagree as per usual. I think we're both looking at this from very different sides of the issue or the concern. Hopefully, there's some collaboration, but what I see right now from this organization is that there's not a willingness to collaborate and actually have constructive conversations. And you can say the same about the government, and you can say the same for the government. Right? I think we can both. But it's not that. It's the government's responsibility. It is not a community group's responsibility. But the government, the responsibility lies with the government. Has made it available. Hey, if you want to meet with us, write us. And now they have. No, they didn't write them. That's the problem. I think my biggest issue is they were like, spray on the newspaper, not hello, or say we have tried to have 17 meetings with the government and they've denied it. That to me is a demonstration that they're trying to collaborate and the government shutting the door. Not being able to say that shows to me that you're not actually trying. You don't want to have these conversations. I might lose faith in my ability to try if the government brought in policies that strip me of my human rights as well. But let's leave it there. The NDP has released. I'll let you have that one, Cheryl. Thank you. The NDP has released its updated membership numbers now that sales have closed in the leadership race. The party now stands at 85,000 members strong across the province. But perhaps most interesting about the numbers is the way that the base of support for the party has shifted. What has historically been in Calgary is now historically been in Edmonton is now in Calgary, where the majority of the memberships now sit. Yeah, I actually, first, I'll commend your party for such a huge growth in your membership. Thanks. I mean, it's not really close to our record, but that's okay. I noticed you said record membership. It was. I know, but what do you think the membership is at now? That is for another discussion. We do not have that in our run a show. No, I still know that I think we're around that or higher. But I didn't actually ask. But we've usually sat in the hundreds, low hundreds. Yeah, I would think it's competitive now. Yeah. And I mean, we're not in a leadership race. I know that our numbers went up obviously significantly 2 years ago. And that is kind of the cycle, right? When there's something to vote for, you get a little bit more excited. But I will say seeing those numbers, and even into the lower, I went through all 9 pages of it. And I feel like we've given Markusoff 2 shout outs on our podcast last week and our podcast this week. But he wrote an article that's kind of breaking down a lot of that. And some of the key takeaways was actually, and because last week I was like, is this a wash? Is everyone just falling into line and going through the motions? Kathleen Ganley, her riding of Calgary Mountain View, which I mean is typically very NDP, but it actually has the highest membership with 3,500 in the province. So to me, that's the likelihood of you voting for your local MLA to be the leader, that's a significant number and a significant, I think, change in maybe the dynamics of this leadership race. Well, Kathleen's number is
for sure are very impressive, especially when you look at that compared to some Edmonton ridings. Like I was blown away. That is,
Glenora,
first
which
of all,
is Hoffman's and where I live. I'm like, oh, that was like way lower than I would have thought.
and I just, first of all, like that's a lot of hard work on Kathleen and her team's part. But it is, I mean, I think that I can't remember the top 7 ridings or something are in Calgary.
Yeah.
In terms of the number of members, that's crazy. Like to think that, you know, there's that level of support, that the top ridings for NDP memberships, the top 7 are sitting in Calgary. It does sort of demonstrate the way the party has shifted over the last few years.
Yeah, I forgot to look at me. I didn't swear. I forgot to print off the list because I actually saw like some really, really interesting things. I mean, I think there was talk about like 5 ridings around Calgary too. Like it's really showing. I mean, yes, Banff and Annaskis was an example. Airdrie Cochrane. Which one is NDP, one is UCP right now. No, I thought there was like some interesting takeaways. Mostly, like the biggest thing is I was like, oh, we might have some good opportunities in Edmonton next election because there was some super, super low ridings that were actually shocking. So I guess my question to you is like, do you think that in this leadership race, like they're forgetting the base, like they're forgetting to put the effort into Edmonton because there was such a big push in Calgary? Like, that was one thing that kind of came out to me.
I think it's a couple things. Like one is I think that like all, you know, when we talk about post-election, what did we learn and what do we need to do differently, which is a question put to all of the candidates. Calgary always comes up. Like had we won a couple more seats in Calgary, the result might have looked a lot different. And so I do think there was a big emphasis put on Calgary and selling memberships in Calgary. And, you know, two of the candidates, is that it? Were from Calgary. So, you know, being in your home city is easier to sell memberships from there rather than travel. But maybe, you know, I think it is a reminder to the party that we can't forget Edmonton, that we can't forget, you know, what has been the NDP stronghold historically. And that, you know, over the course of the next 3 years, whoever is leader is going to have to pay just as much attention to Edmonton as Calgary. But I also think that a lot of the membership sales come from people who are discontent with the with the UCP and with Danielle Smith. So where you see those negative numbers growing, or you see those numbers splitting in terms of approve of the premier, not approve the premier, I think there are a lot of people in Calgary who hadn't made their mind up ahead of the 2023 election who voted UCP and are now motivated by how the UCP has performed to buy memberships. So Calgary was sort of like a swing city. There was seats moving either way. There was seats that flipped at midnight on election night. And I think some of the motivation from buyers are people who have a little bit of remorse over how they voted in 2023.
Yeah, like I did look at Calgary because I think that like that was, I mean, I'm not worried about you guys anywhere in rural right now. But if it's coming down to like, yeah, Edmonton, I think there was like lower numbers than expected. I think it told me that maybe Gill hadn't sold as many memberships, or that same with Jody, like there kind of were lower candidates in the kind of ranking of likelihood. And they're both from there. And so is Sarah Hoffman. I was actually very surprised that Edmonton Glenora didn't have more members, just because I know she door knocks in her own riding quite a bit and would have some pretty good data from there. But the one thing I was interested in is actually some of the close races didn't have the highest numbers of memberships in Calgary. So when I was looking kind of into the weeds on the numbers, it actually made me less worried about Calgary because some of the strongholds had higher, the strongholds of NDP were like the really high ones, or ones that you won by a significant margin last election. And some of the ones I think you need to win actually weren't on the top list. Like it kind of ranges for Calgary, I think, or like it goes down into the like last 10 or 20. There's some Calgary ridings in there. So there are some anomalies to like this blanket approach of we've got a lot of memberships in Calgary, but I think that they're really clustered. So does that translate to new ridings to win? Maybe not.
Yeah, some of it I think is like the ease of selling. Like if you look out at rural Alberta, the reason that there have been so few new memberships sold is because it's just like it's not the most efficient use of time for a campaign. Although those communities are really important, the sparser the houses are, the longer it takes to sell memberships or to door knock. So I think probably where you see, and this is just my own guess, probably where you see higher numbers of memberships, it's a more efficient way to campaign in those ridings. Yeah. And we have to remember too, membership doesn't translate necessarily into like how the vote will split. Like it's not like you can look at a riding and say like there's a big support of NDP here, so all those people are going to turn out and vote, or the people who are not NDP members are not going to vote NDP. These are people who feel strong enough about their politics that they bought a membership and they want to vote in the leadership. The rest of the population, could go one way or the other.
Yeah, but I mean, like, let's be serious. If you're a party, that's a pretty good data map of where you're going to put efforts and things like that. So, I mean, it's not guaranteeing the seat or not. It does tell its own story and translates into strategy on how to win that or how to take it back or whatever that looks like. So there is, data. It's also, again, 3 years out. So that could shift significantly. I think the benefit of the UCP having one so close, one of the only benefits of having it so close was, again, that your membership was engaged and the translation of numbers to votes was a lot more likely than 3 years out. I did want to ask you, though, because like Naheed Nenshi has kind of said this a few times on different podcasts. And if you laid over my support as mayor and you look at like how that would translate to the election, we would win and blah, blah, blah. Do you think that this is giving him some momentum, or you think that he's kind of like getting cocky because of a lot of that coming to fruition, whether it's him or Ganley's work or the whole group of four? How do you think this is impacting that campaign and that campaign strategy?
I don't know if it has that much impact. Like, I think it's great for the party, and I think it's probably great for all the candidates that that Calgary is looking so strong. It's also, for anyone who's going to win, reminding them, like I said, that Edmonton cannot be forgotten or taken for granted. But I don't think it would make Naheed Nenshi feel cocky. Like, I think he still has to be pretty careful
cocky,
about what's that?
More cocky, like cockier.
I think he has to still be pretty careful about making sure that his supporters feel motivated to turn out, to feel like it's not, a done deal and that he's going to win without them, because I think he needs his supporters to come and vote. Like, I don't think selling memberships is enough. I think he's got to stay on top of it enough that people turn out and cast their ballots, whether they're going to mail them in or phone them in or do them online.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's one more debate.
Yeah.
In Edmonton. And then it goes to...
On my birthday.
Oh, that's so fun. Are you moderating that one again? Or do you...
I am not.
Oh, so you get to actually
Hopefully I'll just be eating birthday cake with my family.
You make good cakes, so I hope you're making your own because they're good. Anyways, random fact for the audience. But no, I was going to say, I think that the debates will also help. Like you said, the get out the vote is the biggest thing. You can sell all your memberships, but if you haven't motivated, like, again, the 85,000, huge triumph. Did these people buy them just for like the celebrity component of being involved in something? Getting the people out to actually vote is a huge feat. And basically all you are working on from now until election day is that strategy, or for the last
and then
couple
keeping
months.
them. Like, that's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
Is like, how do we keep those members for the next 3 years? Because like you said, you get a big bump off a leadership race because you have a huge campaign dedicated to selling memberships. But how do you keep those people for the long run? Even if they don't keep their memberships, how do you keep them engaged in supporting the party?
Well, I hope
that will be like the real task of the next leader.
Yeah, no, and I hope you don't. And we'll hopefully have a federal election before then, and they'll all come back to the right. It'll be beautiful.
Well, that's our show for today.
Nice spot, Dan.
Next week will be our final episode of this season. And like we said, we'll have Premier Daniel Smith joining us. So we'd love to have your questions submitted either through X, formerly known as Twitter, or through Instagram, or reaching us on any of the social media platforms. Please send us your ideas or questions, and we'd be happy to put them to the Premier.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And again, like between now and September, when we come back, we'll have some special edition episodes, possibly one around Stampede time over the summer. And we don't want you to miss an episode. So as always, like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erika Barudis. Follow on Instagram @TheDiscoursePod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.